I will give the floor to Johann, and in the meanwhile, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or just type your question in the chat. After Johann's presentation, we will start the discussion and your questions will be addressed.
Yes,
Johann.
thank you, Andras. Please, the next slide, please. Yeah, as you see here, I will try to explain the EPBD with the eyes of a building designer, because REHVA is representing the building designers. And I will focus only on one topic of the EPBD, which is the zero emission building. Next slide, please. Yes, this is just to underline that the EPBD is a general frame. It's a framework directive. And of course, flexibility must be given to the member states for national implementation. So this is why the national implementation is very much important. And although the Commission will issue guidelines to help the member states to indicate where some solutions, and also working on these guidelines, which will be done, I think, issued before the end of the year. It's also quite a huge topic. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just to explain what is REHVA and what is EPB Center. Yeah, REHVA is a federation of air conditioning, heating and ventilation engineers and designers. So we are representing about 120 HVAC designers all over Europe and also in Turkey, in 26 European countries. And the EPB Center is a spin-off of REHVA, who is a service center and focusing on training on energy performance standards. Next slide, please. I think it's important to recall the REHVA principles, because then you can see on which, what is important for us, for the building designers, to look on the EPBD. So for us, of course, it's technology neutrality is very much important. So we are not focusing on one or another system. We are standing for a holistic decarbonized building design, which is based on the energy first principle and the use of renewables. Social responsibility is very much important, because you cannot leave people behind you if they do not accept your solutions. And this has been shown in Germany during the last months, when they wanted to phase out very quickly the fossil fuel boilers, then you will have a problem. So we stand for optimized and affordable solutions. And of course, performance-orientating building codes. It means that you should focus on the results and not on the ways how to reach it, because we think there is no one-fits-all solution. Next slide, please. Yeah, I just here some example on the requirements. For example, what is performance-orientated? Performance-orientated is to fix, for example, an emission level by CO2 gram per square meter and year. And what is a descriptive, not technology neutral approach is saying, for example, phase out fossil fuels. So, for example, we will have a forbidden technology, and this, for example, for the building designer, it's much more complicated to give less possibilities to optimize the building. I see that it's my old presentation, because in Article 26, you have, for district heating, you have a description which is also performance-oriented in Article 26-2 also. So to resume, the new EPBD introduces, in our understanding, much more descriptive requirements, sometimes also without providing the needed definition. As already Andras said, it is, for example, the phase out of fossil fuel boilers. Next slide, please. Yes, to understand really what is in the background in the requirements, of course, the key definitions are key, and this is the first step for an unambiguous implementation. I put here just for illustration, some pictures. No need to go into details, and I will just recall some very much important definitions, which is primary energy. And here now you have the primary energy, which is classified by the origin, which is called perimeter. So you have nearby, you have on-site, nearby, and distant. On-site and nearby are defined in the EPBD. Distant is everything which is not on-site or nearby, but it is not defined. So the parameter is very much important because it comes also, especially for the SEP definition. And another important definitions are primary energy, of course. And then you have to distinguish between renewable, non-renewable, and total. So this is very much important because if you set requirements in renewable, in a non-renewable, or in total, the solutions, the technical solutions behind will be quite different. Very much important is also the energy balance. Victoria told already about how you calculate the performance of the building. Do you take into account or not, for example, the exported energy, for example, by PV or things like something like this. This is absolutely key, and it is not defined in the EPBD. And of course, the assessment boundary, where you count the exported and the delivered energy. So this is what I said already before. There is more explanation needed for the EPBD in the transposition. So this will be done in the national transpositions and also on the future guidelines. Next slide, please. Yeah, and now here it comes to the zero emission buildings implementation. The calculation method, Article 2.2 says that, of course, the energy performance has to be calculated according to the methodology of Annex A1. So this is a calculation methodology. But it's a problem because today in Europe we have more than 30 different calculation methods providing all different results. There is no comparability, and the same house can be a ZEP building in one country, or let's say a near zero energy building in one country, and can have a very low efficient building in another, depending on the calculation method. And here in the picture, you just have some examples. No need to go into details, but for the same building, you see how only with different hypotheses you can reach quite different results. And of course, there is a need for a calculation method. We think that there is a need for a common European calculation methodology based on the European standards. And we think that here the Commission could help by setting up, for example, financing an open source software kernel. Next slide, please. Yeah, now it comes to this Article 11.7, where you have this total, how to satisfy the total annual primary energy requirements. You see here quite a lot of things. I will go into the details in the next slides. But of course, you see that the zero emission building definition is key because will be the target for the building stock in 2050. So it's extremely important. You see also that this is one thing which is, it's a mix of renewables, parameters, efficiency, carbon-free, and even other exceptions. So for us, it's a little bit, a little bit surprising, all these different things. This is, of course, the influence of the different lobbies. And setting as here the requirements in total primary energy, which has to be satisfied by renewables. Okay, things a little bit complicated, and we will go into details. Next slide, please. Yeah, here it is again. I come back to the details because, here in this Article 11.7a, you will see that total energy primary energy use. So what I wanted to explain, it was this annual, because annual, it is understood, not explained in the EPBD now, but this will be done in the guidelines. That something which could be understandable is that you can sum up all the different options, which we just saw before, A to D, to reach 100% of total primary energy. Okay, this is understandable. What is very interesting is that it is permitted that you can use energies with a carbon content, but then this carbon content you must compensate by the export of non-renewables. So this is very much important. And it has to be specified. Yeah, yes, okay. And then, of course, in the implementation, it has to be specified if this annual compensation is done hourly or on a monthly or an annual basis, because then you will have quite different results. So, and here is also, again, it's my old presentation, sorry. There are some mistakes in it. Of course, the annual basis means that there is a compensation allowed, and this allows the use of fossil fuels, not of non-fossil fuels, of fossil fuels, okay? And we see also that there is some, maybe lack of coherency in the EPBD, because then we do not see how this article is coherent with Article 11.1, where it is written that not any on-site carbon emissions from fossil fuels. For the climate, it doesn't matter where and when the CO2 emissions take place, but for the designer, it is very much important because this will give him much more flexibility in the design of the building systems. Next slide, please. Yeah, and here I just focus on again on this article and just focusing on renewables on-site. Yeah. So a renewable on-site is ambient heat. Yeah, it's not always designed how to take into account the ambient heat in the total primary energy, for example. So this is also very much important. But what is important here is when you look closely on it, I understand, or we understand, that only if the heat pump is driven by 100% of renewable energy, it is ZEP compliant. This, of course, is very seldom the case. Very often the heat pump is driven by grid electricity, where you have a fossil fuel, and then, of course, it is not 100% covered by renewable energy. And then it means that the heat pump output must be completed by renewables exported from on-site or nearby. So this is something I think interesting to have in mind when we talk about the heat pump rollout. And then coming to covered by renewables from generated nearby. So I just said before that how the different parameters are defined. The most important thing here is, so it is that it is, there must be a dedicated distribution, probably a physical connections. And of course, nearby, renewables from nearby are defined by a specific primary energy factor. This could be very much important because it could be a quite high, it could be a higher benefit to nearby. Next slide, please. And here you have the district heating. I will not go into the details. You all know. You have Article 26 of the Energy Efficiency Directive, where you have the share of renewables, the waste energy, heat, and the high efficiency. And then you have also the alternative, which is in greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, and I just put here for comparison what we have in the European standard 52,000-1, just to see, the relation. For example, is 200 grams per kilowatt hour. You can look on natural gas, where you have 20 grams per kilowatt hour, etc., just to give a comparison. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then it's something what has been added. It was not in the previous directive. It is this article again D, which means energy from carbon-free sources. Wow. So carbon-free sources, this is nuclear energy and waste from district heating. This might be considered as carbon-free. Yeah, it's also not clearly defined in the directive. But carbon-free sources in general are part of the energy mix, for example, in the electricity grid. And therefore, also in the implementation and in the guidelines, it must be clearly stated that only the share of the carbon-free sources in the energy mix shall be considered. So again, I think for us, it's, there is some, seems that there is some redundancy between the different options. And I think that the performance-oriented target, for example, expressed by renewables or by CO2 emissions would be sufficient. And there is a huge discussion if dedicated distribution does also include or not contractual agreements. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the end of my presentation. So just to resume, to reach an unambiguous requirements, coherent transpositions, there is a need for a common European calculation methodology and definitions. So this is why we are advocating that the Commission should help to develop a European kernel. This is a software tool based on the European standards, which can be overtaken by the member state if wished. The examples, there's very few examples I just showed before, shows that there is a need to complete by the EPBD, by the guidance documents, and of course by the EPBD transposition at national level. We think that the guidance documents are key and should be focused on performance targets, not on the solutions, how to reach these targets. And the professional should be associated in drafting the guidelines, because we see sometimes that, the feedback from the field from practice would be very useful also in the, to take it into account in the guidelines and the implementations. And of course, the correct implementations means that there is a huge training effort needed for professionals in the next years. Thank you for your attention.